Corporal Mason Hayes stepped out of the dropship and onto the surface of Threxia Prime. The ground was red and rocky, and the air was dry, but breathable. Above him, 2 suns hung in the sky, giving everything a strange golden glow. It was his first time on an alien planet, but he didn't let that show on his face. Like any trained Earth soldier, he walked tall and calm, his boots hitting the ground with steady thuds. Around him, the alien world buzzed with activity. Massive towers made of dark metal reached toward the sky. Strange vehicles floated above, the ground, and everywhere, tall Threxians moved like silent shadows. The Threxians were strong, proud, and built like statues. Most stood over 9 feet tall with sharp features, thick armor, and glowing green eyes. They had ruled this part of the galaxy for centuries, and they did not like humans. A group of them stood nearby watching the new arrivals. One of them whispered something, and the others laughed. Mason didn't need a translator to know they were laughing at him. "Corporal Hayes," a voice called behind him. He turned to see Lieutenant Arya Tran, his commanding officer, walking toward him. She was a tough, sharp-eyed woman who had served in 3 alien wars. "Glad you made it. They think we're weak here. Try not to prove them right." "Yes, ma'am," Mason replied with a small smile. She led him through the base. Soldiers from Earth were setting up communication towers and placing defense shields. Drones flew overhead, scanning for threats. Still, the feeling in the air wasn't just military. It was tense, like a storm waiting to break. "Threxia used to be peaceful," Arya explained as they walked. "But 6 months ago, one of our trade ships went missing. Their people blamed us. We blamed pirates. The treaty almost broke down. Now we're here to keep the peace and prove we belong." Mason nodded. "And they don't believe we're strong enough to stand beside them." "Exactly," she said, "especially their queen." They reached the main hall, a giant dome built from shining black stone. Inside stood the Queen of Threxia herself, Syraxa, the Iron Crown. She was taller than any other Threxian in the room, wearing a long cloak of silver and gold. Her armor shone like polished steel, her eyes glowed brighter than the rest, and her voice was deep, clear, and sharp as a blade. "So," she said, stepping forward, "this is the human soldier who thinks he can walk on Threxian soil without shaking." Her voice echoed through the hall. Mason didn't flinch. He looked up at her calmly. "Corporal Mason Hayes, Earth Forces." She circled him slowly, her tall frame casting a long shadow over him. "Your bones are thin. Your muscles are soft. Your kind builds machines to make up for what nature did not give you." Mason stayed silent. "Do you fear me?" she asked. "No," he said simply. That made her pause. Then she laughed, a loud booming sound that bounced off the walls. The other Threxians laughed with her. Even some of the human soldiers looked uncomfortable. "You are brave," she said, "or foolish. We will see which soon." After the Queen left, Mason stood alone for a moment, feeling the weight of many eyes on him. He had never been in a room where he was the smallest person, but he wasn't afraid. He had trained for this. Earth's gravity was heavy. Its soldiers were used to harsh conditions. He had run drills in gravity chambers and learned to fight in zero atmosphere. He might not be tall, but he was strong in ways they couldn't see. Later that night, as he sat in the bunkhouse, another soldier handed him a data tablet. "They've challenged you to a gravity trial," the soldier said. "Tomorrow morning." Mason looked at the screen. It was real. The Queen had ordered a test of strength, not a fight, but a trial to see how long he could survive under increasing gravity pressure. "She thinks you'll fall in the first minute," the soldier added. "She wants to prove humans are weak." Mason smiled to himself. "Then I guess I'd better stand a little longer than that." Outside, the twin suns set behind jagged hills, casting long shadows over the Earth camp. The stars above Threxia Prime blinked into view, cold, silent, and waiting. But on the ground, something had just begun. The morning light on Threxia Prime was sharp and cold. Corporal Mason Hayes woke early, his muscles tense but ready. Today was no ordinary day. It was the day of the gravity trial, a test that could change everything. The gravity trial was a tradition among the Threxians. It was not a fight, but a challenge of endurance and strength. The participants stood in a special chamber where the gravity slowly increased. The stronger you were, the longer you could stand against the crushing weight. Most humans had never experienced gravity above Earth's level, but on Threxia Prime, the gravity could climb to nearly 3 times what Mason was used to. Mason dressed quickly in the standard trial suit, a tight, dark uniform designed to protect and help the body in heavy gravity. He checked the small control panel on his wrist. It showed the current gravity level and how long he had been in the trial. At the base camp, the chamber was already filled with warriors. Threxian soldiers, tall and proud, stood side by side with smaller soldiers from other planets. Their faces were serious. Many looked at Mason as if he did not belong. Lieutenant Arya Tran came over and gave Mason a nod. "Remember what I told you, don't let their size scare you. You have trained harder than any of them." Mason nodded. "I'm ready." The chamber's door hissed shut behind them. Inside, the floor was made of a smooth, metallic surface. The walls were lined with glowing blue panels that showed the current gravity level. A soft hum filled the room. A voice, deep and commanding, spoke over the speakers. "Welcome to the gravity trial. Stand your ground. Show your strength. May the strongest survive." The gravity started at normal Earth level, 1 standard gravity or 1G. Mason felt comfortable. He stood steady, his feet firmly on the ground. Slowly, the gravity began to rise. First to 1.5G, then 2G. Mason's legs felt heavier, his breath a little shorter, but he stayed calm. His training kicked in. He focused on his posture, tightening his core muscles, breathing deeply. Around him, one by one, the others began to show signs of strain. Some bent at the knees, others gasped for air. Then, with small cries of pain, the first challengers fell to their knees and gave up. Mason kept watching, not letting his eyes drift away. When the gravity hit 2.5G, only a few warriors remained standing. Among them was a tall, broad-shouldered Threxian named Kavor, known for his brute strength. He looked at Mason with surprise and respect. Mason nodded at him in return. The gravity climbed higher. 2.8G. Mason's legs burned, but he refused to bend. His body screamed for relief, but his mind was stronger. Then the unexpected happened. The gravity reached 3G, 3 times Earth's pull. Mason felt as if a giant hand was pushing him down hard. Every step was a struggle, every breath a fight. But he stood tall. Suddenly, a loud clang echoed through the chamber. Kavor fell, his knees buckling. The room gasped. The other Threxians looked stunned. Mason was alone with only 2 other warriors now. One was a quiet alien from the Velian race, known for their speed but not their strength. The other was a giant Threxian female, tall like Queen Syraxa but not as fierce. The gravity kept increasing, but the controls stopped climbing at 3.2G. The trial was reaching its peak. Mason's muscles trembled. Sweat ran down his face, but he stayed strong. The small crowd watching outside the chamber cheered softly. They were surprised. This human was not falling. When the trial ended, the door hissed open. Mason stepped out, barely able to stand, but proud. Lieutenant Tran was waiting with a smile. "You did it," she said. "You outlasted nearly everyone." Word of Mason's strength spread quickly through the base. Even the aliens began to talk about the human who could stand against heavy gravity longer than most of them. But the Queen was not so easy to impress. That afternoon, Mason was summoned to the throne room again. Queen Syraxa stood waiting, her arms crossed. "So, the little human does not break under pressure," she said, her voice low but sharp. "Impressive, but strength in a chamber is not strength in battle." Mason looked her in the eyes. "I'm ready to prove it in any way you choose." The Queen smiled, but it was not kind. "Tomorrow you will face more than just gravity, you will face me." The room fell silent. The idea that a human could challenge the queen herself seemed impossible. Mason's heart raced, but his voice was steady. "Then I will not back down." Queen Syraxa laughed, a sound that filled the hall like thunder. "You have spirit. Very well, human. Prepare yourself." As Mason left the throne room, he knew the real challenge was coming. The queen was not just testing his strength. She was testing humanity itself. That night, Mason stared at the stars above Threxia Prime. They seemed cold and distant, but he felt a fire inside him. He was not just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for the honor of all Earth. The next morning dawned bright and clear over Threxia Prime, but the weight on Mason Hayes's shoulders felt heavier than the twin suns in the sky. Today was the day the queen would put him to the ultimate test, not just of strength, but of pride. The hall where Mason was summoned was larger than any building he had ever seen on Earth. Its walls were made of dark stone that shimmered faintly, and high above, great banners hung from the ceiling, symbols of the Threxian Empire's power. In the center of the room stood Queen Syraxa, her silver and gold cloak flowing like liquid metal. She did not speak at first. Her eyes scanned Mason slowly, as if weighing his very soul. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of distant engines outside. Finally, the queen spoke. "You surprised us all in the gravity trial, human. You stood longer than most warriors twice your size. For that, I offer you a choice." She took a step forward, the light catching the edges of her sharp armor. "A chance to prove your worth beyond machines and tests." Mason kept his gaze steady. "I'm ready." Syraxa's lips curved into a faint smile, almost like a challenge. "Very well. We will make a public demonstration, a test of raw strength." Mason's heart beat faster. He had trained for battle, but this was something different. It was not a fight for survival. It was a fight for respect. The queen's voice echoed through the hall. "If you can impress me, I will order a new treaty, one that recognizes Earth as a true power in the galaxy. But if you fail, you will withdraw all claims to Threxian space." The room seemed to hold its breath. Even the Threxian soldiers looked uneasy. Mason knew the stakes were higher than ever. Syraxa stepped closer and placed her hands on her hips. "The challenge is simple. If you can lift me off the ground with one hand, I will kneel before Earth's strength." Laughter burst from the crowd. Mason could see the disbelief in their eyes. The queen, nearly 9 feet tall and built like a mountain, laughed too, a deep, mocking sound. "Lift me," she said, shaking her head. "Humans are too weak." Mason said nothing. Instead, he walked forward toward the queen. The silence in the hall grew thicker, as if time itself had paused. He stopped in front of Syraxa and looked up into her glowing green eyes. "I accept." A guard stepped forward and helped the queen into position. She stood tall and proud, but there was a flicker of curiosity in her gaze. No one had ever dared make such a claim before. Mason took a deep breath and bent his knees slightly, placing one hand firmly on her waist. The crowd gasped. The queen's armor was heavy, and she was taller than anyone Mason had ever lifted. The weight pressed down on Mason's arm like a boulder. His muscles screamed, but he tightened his grip and lifted with slow, steady strength. For a moment, Syraxa's feet left the ground. The hall fell silent. Mason held her there, just off the ground, his arm shaking but unyielding. Then, with careful control, he lowered her back down. The queen's eyes widened. No one had ever lifted her before. A beat passed. Then the queen laughed again, but this time it was different. It was not mocking. It was full of surprise and respect. "You are stronger than I imagined, human," she said, her voice softer but still proud. The crowd erupted into cheers and whispers. Threxian soldiers exchanged looks, unsure what to think. Lieutenant Arya Tran pushed through the crowd and clapped Mason on the back. "You did it," she said, smiling wide. "You just changed everything." Syraxa raised her hand, calling for silence. "This demonstration is more than strength," she said. "It is courage, and courage is what makes a true leader." Mason nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and excitement. He had earned a place among the proudest warriors in the galaxy. The Queen looked at him again. "Prepare yourself. Tomorrow, we begin talks. But for now, enjoy your victory." As Mason left the hall, soldiers and diplomats stopped him to congratulate him. He knew this was only the beginning. The galaxy was watching, and humanity had just shown it was no longer weak. That night, as Mason stared up at the strange stars, he thought about the path ahead. The Queen's laughter had turned from scorn to respect, but would it last? In the shadows, unseen eyes watched him too. Some were friendly, others were not. The game for Threxia's future had begun, and Mason was in the center of it all. The grand arena of Threxia Prime was like nothing Mason Hayes had ever seen. It was enormous, a vast circle of polished black stone surrounded by towering stands filled with thousands of spectators. Alien banners fluttered in the warm breeze, and the air was thick with excitement. Today was the day Mason would face the ultimate challenge, the alien queen herself. Word of the upcoming event had spread quickly through the galaxy. Every major species sent representatives to watch. Diplomats, warriors, traders, all were curious to see if a human could truly match a Threxian queen in strength. Mason stood behind the gate, his heart pounding but his face calm. Around him, other warriors prepared themselves, but none dared to step forward for the challenge. This was not just a test of muscles. It was a test of pride, honor, and courage. Lieutenant Arya Tran came to his side. "Remember, Mason," she said quietly, "this is not just about strength. It's about showing who we are." Mason nodded. "I know. Let's do this." The gate opened with a heavy clang, and Mason stepped into the arena. The crowd roared as he walked to the center. From above, huge spotlights focused on him and the other figure waiting. The Queen. Queen Syraxa stood tall and proud, her silver armor shining under the lights. She looked down at Mason with a smile that was equal parts challenge and respect. "Human," she said loudly so all could hear, "you have come far. But do you truly believe you can lift me?" Mason met her gaze without fear. "I don't just believe it. I will." Syraxa laughed, a rich, deep sound that echoed through the arena. Then, she moved forward and let herself be lifted into position. Mason bent his knees and placed one hand firmly on her waist. The Queen's armor was heavy, and her frame was larger than any opponent he had ever faced. The crowd held its breath. With a slow, powerful motion, Mason lifted her off the ground. For a brief moment, the Queen floated in the air, held high by a single human hand. The silence that followed was heavy and deep. Mason's arm shook under the strain, but he held on. Then with steady control, he lowered Syraxa back to the ground. The Queen's eyes widened in shock and something else, respect. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then the Queen laughed again, but this time it was different. It was a laugh. Of approval, not mockery. "You have done what no other has," she said, her voice loud enough for all to hear. "You have lifted the alien queen with one hand." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Mason felt a wave of relief and pride. The impossible had happened. Syraxa stepped forward and raised Mason's hand above his head. "Today, Earth is stronger than we believed." The cheers grew louder. Lieutenant Tran pushed through the crowd to stand beside Mason. "You made history," she said, smiling wide. "The galaxy will remember this day." Mason looked at the Queen. "Thank you for the chance." Syraxa nodded. "The chance was yours to take." As the arena slowly emptied, Mason's mind raced. The lift was more than a show of strength. It was a symbol, a bridge between two worlds. But he also knew challenges still waited. Not all would welcome a human who could match their greatest warrior. That night, Mason stood outside the arena looking at the stars. Somewhere out there, threats lurked. But for now, he had earned a moment of victory. A moment that could change the course of history. The cheers from the grand arena still echoed in Mason Hayes' ears as he returned to the base camp on Threxia Prime. What had seemed impossible only days ago had now become reality. He had lifted Queen Syraxa with one hand. The galaxy had seen it, and word was spreading fast. But Mason knew this victory was just the beginning. Strength in the arena was one thing. Real power came from diplomacy, alliances, and trust, and those were much harder to win. The next morning, Mason stood in the conference hall, facing a large crowd of alien diplomats and Threxian leaders. Queen Syraxa sat at the head of the table, her expression serious but calmer than before. The room was filled with tension. "This assembly is called to discuss the future of the Threxian sector," the Queen announced. "Earth has proven it is stronger than we believed. Now we must decide how to move forward." Mason felt all eyes on him. The challenge was clear. Could a human soldier turn a moment of strength into a lasting peace? The representatives from other alien worlds whispered among themselves. Many were surprised by the Queen's change in attitude. Some even looked doubtful. Mason took a deep breath and stepped forward. "I speak not only for myself, but for all humanity. We do not seek conquest or war. We want to build trust and work together." He paused, then continued. "Strength is important, but it is only part of who we are. We value honor, courage, and respect. We want peace that lasts." There was a murmur from the crowd. Some nodded, slowly. Others remained silent. Queen Syraxa rose and faced the assembly. "The trial showed us that strength is not just muscle. It is spirit. Mason's courage has earned Earth a place at this table." She turned to Mason. "As my personal envoy, you will help lead the talks. We will listen to each other and find a way forward." Mason bowed his head in respect. "I will do my best." Over the next days, Mason worked closely with the Queen and her council. The talks were long and difficult. Old wounds, fear, and suspicion made every word heavy. Some alien leaders wanted to push humans out. They believed Threxian strength should remain unchallenged. Others saw hope in Mason's presence. He was proof that humans could be strong and honorable. In private, Queen Syraxa confided in Mason. "Your people have surprised us, but there are those who resist change. You must be careful." Mason nodded. "I know, but I believe we can make this work." One afternoon, while walking through the palace gardens, Mason asked, "Why did you laugh when I lifted you? Was it really just surprise?" The Queen smiled softly. It was laughter born from pride and disbelief, but also respect. "You showed me something new. That strength can come from unexpected places." Mason looked at the bright stars above the palace walls. "Then maybe strength is about more than power. Maybe it is about trust." Syraxa nodded. "Yes, trust is the strongest bond of all." However, not all were happy. A secret faction within the Threxian military saw Mason's rise as a threat to their power. They whispered in dark halls, plotting to weaken the Queen and stop the alliance with Earth. Mason sensed the danger, but focused on his mission. The future of two worlds depended on their success. As the talks continued, Mason and Syraxa grew closer. They learned from each other, two leaders from very different worlds united by respect and a shared hope. One evening, after a long day of negotiations, the Queen said quietly, "You have lifted me with your hand, Mason, but you have lifted our future with your heart." Mason smiled. "We still have a long road ahead, but for the first time, I believe we can walk it together." The stars above Threxia Prime twinkled quietly, as if watching the birth of a new era. The palace of Queen Syraxa was a fortress of power and pride. Its towering walls gleamed in the twin suns, and its halls echoed with the steps of many warriors and advisors. Yet beneath its strength, secrets and struggles whispered quietly, things Mason Hayes was only beginning to understand. Since becoming Syraxa's personal envoy, Mason spent much time inside the palace. He learned that the Queen's power was not just from her strength or her crown, it was also from the heavy burden she carried. One afternoon, Mason was invited to a private audience with Syraxa. The great throne room was empty except for the two of them. The queen's eyes were tired but fierce. "You have seen me as a warrior," she said, "but I am also a leader who must protect my people from threats both outside and within." Mason listened carefully. "There are those in the Threxian military who do not trust humans," Siraxa continued. "They believe our strength must never be shared. Some plot to remove me and end this new alliance." Mason's jaw tightened. "How do you plan to stop them?" "The same way I always have, through strength and wisdom," she replied. "But I need allies." Mason nodded. "You have mine." Over the next days, Mason worked with the queen to build trust among the palace guards and the council. He attended meetings where old warriors questioned his place at the table. Some sneered at him behind closed doors. Others watched him closely, waiting for him to fail. But Mason stood firm. He spoke with respect and honesty. Slowly, some began to see him not as an outsider, but as a symbol of a new future. One evening, Siraxa took Mason to the palace gardens. The stars shone brightly above, and the air was cool. "Why do you stay so calm, Mason?" she asked quietly. "When others doubt you, when danger hides in the shadows." Mason thought for a moment. "Because I believe in what I'm fighting for. Strength is not just muscle. It is purpose." Siraxa smiled, a rare softness in her eyes. "You remind me of someone I once knew. A warrior who fought not just with fists, but with his heart." Mason was surprised. "Who?" "The king who ruled before me," she said. "He believed in strength through honor and peace. I try to be like him, but it is not easy." They stood in silence, the night wrapping around them like a quiet shield. Suddenly, a sharp knock broke the peace. A palace guard entered with urgent news. "Your Majesty, there is trouble in the outer district. Rebels are gathering." Siraxa's eyes narrowed. "The faction moves faster than I thought." She turned to Mason. "Prepare yourself. This night may decide the fate of the alliance." Mason's heart quickened, but he nodded. Together they moved quickly through the palace, gathering loyal guards and weapons. The outer district was dark and quiet, but tension hung heavy in the air. Rebels from the military faction had begun to spread fear, hoping to weaken the queen's rule. Mason and Siraxa led the loyalists through the narrow streets. As they approached the rebels' position, Mason could see the anger and fear in their eyes. "This is more than a fight for power," Mason whispered. "It's a battle for the future." Siraxa raised her voice. "We do not want war, but we will defend what is rightfully ours." The rebels hesitated, but did not attack immediately. Mason stepped forward. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "We are stronger together. Earth and Threxia can build a future that honors both our peoples, but only if we trust each other." For a long moment, silence filled the street. Then one rebel leader lowered his weapon. Slowly, others followed. The threat was not over, but the first cracks in the rebellion appeared. Back at the palace, Siraxa placed a hand on Mason's shoulder. "You carry more than strength. You carry hope." Mason smiled, feeling the weight of the moment. "We will face what comes. Together." The stars above Threxia Prime shone brighter that night, as if lighting a path toward a stronger tomorrow. The palace of Queen Siraxa was alive with tension. The rebels had not disappeared. They were gathering strength again, planning a new attack to overthrow the queen and end the alliance with Earth. The future of Threxia Prime, and humanity's place in the galaxy, hung in the balance. Corporal Mason Hayes stood at the side of the queen, his hand steady on the hilt of his energy blade. He looked out over the city from the palace balcony. The stars shone brightly above, but below, the streets were restless. "Do you think we can stop them?" Mason asked quietly. Siraxa turned to him, her eyes fierce with determination. "We must. Our people's survival depends on it." The queen gathered her loyal warriors and trusted advisors in the war room. Plans were drawn, strategies discussed, and weapons prepared. Mason watched carefully. This was not just a battle of strength. It was a battle of minds, courage, and will. That night, the rebel forces struck. The city shook with the sound of explosions and the clash of weapons. Mason fought alongside the Queen, their movements precise and powerful. Though outnumbered, the Loyalists stood firm. In the heat of battle, Mason saw the strength that had made Siraxa a great leader. Not just her power, but her courage to stand with her people. At one point, a rebel warrior charged at Siraxa. Without hesitation, Mason stepped in and blocked the attack. Their blades clashed, sparks flying. Mason's training on Earth had prepared him for this moment. The fight was fierce, but Mason held his ground. As the battle raged, more Loyalists joined Mason and Siraxa. The rebels, seeing the Queen's courage and the human soldiers' bravery, began to falter. Finally, the rebel leader, a fierce Threxian named Darek, faced Mason in a one-on-one duel. Darek was larger and stronger, but Mason was quicker and smarter. The two circled, each waiting for an opening. With a sudden move, Mason dodged a heavy strike and landed a solid blow. Darek stumbled and fell to his knees. Mason held his blade at Darek's throat but did not strike. "Your fight is lost," Mason said, "but there is still a chance for peace." Darek looked up, breathing hard. Slowly, he dropped his weapon. The battle ended. In the days that followed, the Queen honored Mason publicly. At a great ceremony in the grand arena, Siraxa raised Mason's hand before the crowd. "He lifted me with one hand," she said, "but he held our future with the other." The crowd cheered loudly. Mason smiled, feeling the weight of those words. He had come to Threxia Prime as a simple soldier. Now he was a symbol of hope, courage, and unity between two very different worlds. As the treaty was signed, promising peace and cooperation, Mason knew the road ahead would not be easy. But he also knew this: true strength was not just muscle or power. It was the courage to stand for what is right, the wisdom to seek peace, and the heart to unite even the fiercest enemies. Under the twin suns of Threxia Prime, a new era had begun.